feedback, and make sure that it's all incorporated into the final version of the Regional Solid Waste Management Plan. Please do try to keep your microphone on mute when you aren't speaking so we don't hear any of that fun background noise throughout the meeting. Please also introduce yourself via the chat box if joining by computer, or introduce yourself if you have joined by phone. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to use the hand raise function in Teams or put your question directly in the chat. We should have plenty of time to address any questions or comments during today's meeting. And I actually have somebody already raising their hand. Michelle, go ahead. Okay, Michelle, I'm going to unraise your hand or lower your hand. If you've got questions, you can either put it in the chat or just interrupt me real quick. I am going to drop a few links in the chat for your convenience, just so that you guys have easy reference to some of the things we'll be talking about today. The first will be a link to the Regional Solid Waste Management Plan webpage, which will house all of the links I will be sharing. And then later on today, we'll also include copies of today's presentations as well. All right, so just some background information. The draft Regional Solid Waste Management Plan that we are presenting today for comments and feedback is available online. I'm dropping that direct link in the chat for you all. And then before I turn it over to Burns and Mac, I just wanted to give some key background information to the group so you're aware of why we're doing this and why we're seeking y'all's feedback. So COG is contractually obligated to update the regional plan. We also have to utilize the templates that were created by TCEQ to ensure consistency across all of the 24 Council of Governments. I'll also be dropping a link to TCEQ's website where you can find information on the regional plans, including copies of those required templates, FAQ sheets, and helpful links, just for that extra background information if you're curious. It is located all the way down at the bottom of the webpage. You have to scroll all the way down. So the Regional Management Plan Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the Resource Conservation Council, it's the subcommittee that's charged with updating, maintaining, and providing feedback on the regional plan. They elected that they wanted us to update both Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the regional plan, even though the Volume 2 regional plan was just updated about 5 years ago. And then for more background information, Volume 1 is just kind of a high-level overview of the plan, includes the goals and objectives, and Volume 2 is way more detailed, includes tables, charts, and additional information on how these goals and objectives in Volume 1 will be addressed. And those current plans are also located on the Regional Solid Waste Management Plan website that I shared with you earlier, but I will be dropping the direct links to both Volume 1 and Volume 2 that we're currently going off of in the chat box. So like I mentioned, the subcommittee decided that they wanted us to update both volumes just to make sure that there's consistency across both of them and ensure that the requirements set by TCEQ were met as well. The subcommittee also directed COG to hire a contractor through an RFP process to help us in updating the regional plan. And Burns & McDonnell was retained by COG for this process. And today they're going to be presenting the draft regional plan and some key takeaways from it as well. So as part of this process, just so you know, COG did provide a previous draft of the regional plan that is presented today to the subcommittee for their review and comment, and any comments received during that period have been incorporated already. And Burns & McDonnell is going to provide a lot more detail on additional stakeholder input and other deliverables that were key in the development of this regional plan. As I've mentioned multiple times, we are seeking your feedback and comments on the revised draft of the regional plan. I'll share anticipated next steps on the final approval of the plan after Burns & McDonnell's presentation, but please note that we are accepting comments on this plan through tomorrow, July 1st, 2022, and you can send them to me via email at hallen@nctcog.org. And I'll also be linking that in the chat for you all as well. So I know that was a lot of links all at once, and I see Kathy's hand is raised. I was going to pause for questions. So Kathy, go ahead.
So Hannah, great description there of what we're doing. So Can you tell me who on the RCC subcommittee is on this call today, or who's been involved in this process?
Absolutely, I can. So Eric Hopes from City of McKinney, not to put you on the spot here, but you're the first one in alphabetical order. He is the vice chair of the Regional Management Plan Subcommittee. Lots of acronyms in here. And then looks like maybe that might be it from the subcommittee itself on the call today.
I assume Cecile was involved in this too, correct?
Yes, Cecile Carson is the chair of the subcommittee, and she was very, very key in the development of this and gave us lots of feedback as well.
All right, well, shout out to Eric since he's on the call.
Absolutely. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands raised or questions in the chat. So for those of you that maybe missed my big spiel, we're about to get started with Burns and McDonald's presentation, and we'll take questions at the end. So Scott, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Hannah, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for us to share with you some of the key analysis and findings for this regional solid waste management plan update. Give me just 1 second and I'll share my screen. All right, so hopefully, Jonathan, hopefully everybody's seeing what they should be seeing, right?
Yeah, it looks good to me. Thanks.
Okay, great. And so again, my name is Scott Pasternak. I know a number of those of you all who are with us today, but definitely see a few new names. So look forward to meeting you all and answering any questions or comments that you may have today. A little bit of our background is that Burns and Mac has done a number of other solid waste and recycling projects, not only for the Council of Governments, but many of the cities within the planning region. So, we feel very appreciative of this opportunity to work on this regional solid waste management plan, because we understand how important it is in terms of guiding the future of the region from a solid waste management perspective, as well as many of the decisions that will likely be made by the COG and specifically by the RCC, which is the Resource Conservation Council, or kind of the key body that makes important decisions and collaborates with the COG and its staff. And so as I get going today, I also wanted to introduce a couple of the key Burns and Mac team members that have put in extensive efforts into this. And so the Jonathan, who I just referred to, is Jonathan Geisels, who's worked side by side with me as one of our lead planners on this effort. And then from a stakeholder engagement perspective, Talia Clark is also on the call, and she was very, very helpful on the survey efforts that we are going to talk about with you all today. As Hannah mentioned, our request would be that we please answer any questions or address any comments after we go through my presentation. I've planned for about a 30-minute presentation, so we should have plenty of time to address any of the questions or comments that you may have. But by allowing us to just go through the presentation, that'll make sure that everybody can have that same information. And then if anybody does need to go before the full duration of the meeting is completed, you'll at least have gotten the benefit of the presentation. And as Hannah mentioned, the COG will be accepting any written comments through tomorrow. So hopefully this discussion today will give you key insight if you do have additional comments or questions. So in terms of what we want to cover with you today, our agenda is to first talk about the planning process. So some of that is going to restate what Hannah mentioned, but given kind of the specific ways in which TCEQ has required each of the councils of governments to go about their planning process, we think that's beneficial to communicate once again. There's been pretty extensive stakeholder engagement throughout this planning process, so we'd like to share that with you all. And then where we want to spend most of our time in this presentation today is to talk about some of the key topics that are addressed as part of this regional solid waste management plan. And then we'll definitely answer any questions or comments that you may have, and then we'll wrap it up with an overview of key next steps. So Hannah just went through this next slide as far as virtual meeting reminders, but in case you joined late or it's also important just to communicate these once again. Just please make sure if you're not speaking to try to mute your microphone. We definitely encourage use of the chat box or raising of your hands so that if multiple people have questions, we will definitely call on you once we go through the order of people raising their hands. And on the chat box, again, if just whenever you have questions or comments throughout the presentation, just go ahead and put those in the chat box, and we can go back through those once we're done with the presentation. And if you do speak up, if you're not called on, just please let us know who you are when you speak. And then, as Hannah mentioned earlier, we are recording the presentation as well. So from a planning process, this is some of the key information that Hannah showed on one of her slides, but we thought this was really important to make sure everybody had a full appreciation of. So TCEQ has required that each of the state's 24 councils of governments complete their updates for regional solid waste management plan using what we would describe as TCEQ's prescriptive format. And on the next slide, we'll walk through some of the aspects of what that format looks like. But before we do that, just if you want to ask yourself the question of why is it important to complete this type of a plan? And from our perspective, it's really to help determine solid waste and recycling program planning for the next 20 years. That doesn't mean that we're going to map out, or the COG's going to map out everything for the next 20 years, because there are going to be more near term in the next 5 years actions to be taken, but to look at what needs to occur by assessing both current and planned practices, evaluating the adequacy of facilities within the region, as well as to address a number of other key topics. And from a planning perspective, the intent of this is for this plan to serve as a region-wide planning tool, recognizing that this is about the largest and one of the most diverse regions in the state of Texas, so that there's going to be a number of different priorities to be addressed, as well as infrastructure requirements in different parts of the region. I can tell you that historically, the North Central Texas COG and the RCC, have really relied on what's been in their plan to undertake a number of other very important initiatives, such as focusing on education and outreach, with a really good example of that having been the Know What to Throw educational recycling campaign, just as one example. So this is really the planning process to help with so many issues that will be addressed going forward. So in terms of the actual overview of the content of the plan, each of these sections that are identified on the left-hand side are specifically what is required by the TCEQ, starting with an overview and an introduction section. And then TCEQ requires, through a series of forms in a volume 1 and a volume 2, very specific information to be provided. So volume 1 is a very brief form, in which the COG has summarized its material management goals and objectives for the region. So there are 5 main goals within this plan, and we'll walk through what each of those are in just a few minutes. And then volume 2, again, is another TCEQ required form that summarizes a number of material management practices, facility adequacy, and some other key topics. And the topics that are addressed within volume 2 are straight out of the state laws and regulations. So if you're asking, okay, well, why is TCEQ being so prescriptive? They're simply just wanting to follow the laws and regulations established for regional solid waste plans here in Texas. Now, TCEQ does allow for additional information to be required beyond what's in the specific forms of Volume 2, and that's in the form of attachments. And so we have, as appropriate or applicable, developed additional information that correspond to each of the different topics that are there as a part of Volume 2. So hopefully that makes sense. And if you look at the documents and you're wondering, why was it prepared this way? Again, it's because this is the way that TCEQ wants each of the regional plans to be developed so that they can be prepared in a consistent, uniform way across our diverse state of Texas. So in terms of the planning process, I won't go through each of these individual details, but to give you a high level perspective of what's been completed, looking at this graphic from left to right, we've had project management not only at the beginning of the project, but throughout the course of this engagement, where the beginnings started with our information request as well as kickoff meeting. But then we have had various progress reports on a monthly basis, as well as meetings with multiple entities during the development of the planning process. And then the second box from the left focused on the plan research and development. That included the development and administration of a survey for local governments that we'll provide some highlights of in a few minutes, as well as other data collection and analysis information that then fed into us then completing our assessment in the third box of the current regional goals and suggested adjustments. And so this included an analysis of the current goals, as well as multiple meetings with the subcommittee that Hannah referred to, as well as with the RCC. And so out of this came suggested adjustments for the regional plan. And so in the box that's outlined in red is essentially where we are now in the planning process, where we have completed the drafts of both the Volume 1 and Volume 2. We're here today to conduct this very important public meeting. And then based on any comments that we receive and are appropriate to address, we will then produce the final versions of Volumes 1 and 2. There has been very important stakeholder engagement as shown in that orange arrow across the bottom of the slide. So to get into some of that, we'd like to transition to communicating that information at this moment. So this slide gives you a sense of the various meetings and other touch points that have occurred. And so it started back in March with providing a status update to the regional management plan subcommittee. And then in mid-March to that same subcommittee, providing them with a presentation of draft materials. And then for several weeks, there was an opportunity for that subcommittee to review the plan. As Kathy asked earlier about who the participants were in that planning process, and Cecile, specifically her participation, we did receive some comments from the subcommittee, but I would characterize their comments as being more clarifying type information. So there was definitely no major issues that needed to be addressed based on their comments that were provided. And so where we are now is asking for comments from you all representing the public, as well as I know a number of you all also serve on the RCC. And so that public comment period is going from the second half of June and through tomorrow. And then once those comments are received, we'll collaborate with the Council of Governments to determine which ones need to be addressed. And then during the month of July is when we will seek to finalize the documents and request approval from the RCC. So the reason why the time frame goes from July 5th through July 29th is that the amount of time that we'll need and to collaborate with the COG largely is going to depend on the extent of the comments received. So our hope is that we can turn the documents around as soon as we reasonably can, but we'll just have to see the extent of the comments that are received by tomorrow. And so in August is when we will provide the submission of the documents to the COG's executive board. And then the plan is to have an executive board meeting for approval toward the end of August. So another key aspect of the stakeholder engagement was to get key input from local governments within the region. And so our team did administer a survey to municipalities in the region to capture both their current and planned solid waste and recycling efforts and priorities. And the way that we developed this survey was to be consistent with the issues that needed to be evaluated specific to the volume 2 topics. So in a few minutes, we'll show you what those volume 2 topics are. And so we included questions that aligned with those. So in terms of the survey responses, a total of 43 different entities responded to the survey, mainly cities, a few counties, as well as other political jurisdictions that are involved in solid waste management and recycling. So these 43 communities represent about 5.5 million residents within the region, which is equal to about 2/3 of the total population of the region. This map on the next slide gives you a sense of where those local governments are located. So we did get really good responses from local governments that kind of make up the core metroplex area of the region. But we also did receive a number of other very important survey responses from areas that are more rural or out in suburban areas of the region. So what we'd like to do now is to talk about some of the key topics that were addressed as a part of the regional solid waste management plan. And so what's shown on this slide within these different parts of the table are all of the different topics that are required to be addressed by TCEQ. And so what we're going to highlight for you all today are the ones that are shown in this light blue color, but all of them are certainly addressed in volume 2 of the plan, as well as the goals and objectives being a part of volume 1. So even though we're not going to directly talk about all of these categories, and that was just in the interest of time, some of them have been essentially addressed in other categories. For example, when we talk about the goals and objectives here, they are going to reflect as well the assessment of source reduction and waste minimization efforts, as well as additional efforts for source reduction and waste minimization efforts as well. So what I'm going to do now is just to go through each one of these that are highlighted in blue. And then again, once we get through all of that, is when we'll answer any questions that you may have. So in terms of the goals and objectives, these were actually developed by the North Central Texas COG staff and the RCC based on a separate survey effort, but we also reviewed these goals and objectives to make sure that they were in alignment with the work that Burns and Mack was doing in developing the volume 2 information. And so what I thought I would do now is to read to you all. There are 5 goals, so just to read to you what each of the goal numbers are. But then I was not necessarily going to read off each and every one of the sub objectives, but to kind of paraphrase some of the importance of these various goals. So the first goal is to support materials management education and training. And so this is really not just a very important goal, since it is the top one for North Central Texas, but it's something that North Central Texas COG has been really focused on for the last several years in terms of supporting education and outreach programs to really achieve improvements on issues such as source reduction, reuse, and recycling. And I think that North Central Texas COG has a really meaningful track record along these lines. Again, I know I mentioned this earlier, but this is where I think the Know What to Throw campaign has really shown what can be done from a regional perspective in terms of education and outreach. And it's not just about the recycling efforts, because on objective 1B is also looking at additional efforts for education and outreach to reduce litter and illegal dumping, and then 1C focuses on HHW. So I think this is a very important role for the Council of Governments to take on, especially from a regional perspective. And then the second goal is to promote the creation and expansion of waste management programs. And so this really covers a lot of ground, but in 2A focuses on the importance of source reduction, reuse, and recycling programs for governmental entities, as well as residential and commercial sectors. And then 2B and 2C respectively focus on construction and demolition materials, as well as organics. And then 2D addresses expanding existing collection and management alternatives for other wastes, as well as establish and expanding new product markets. This one is especially meaningful to me, given that Burns and Mac worked with TCQ on the recycling market development plan, and recycling market development plan was also mentioned in the survey that was completed for the municipalities in North Central Texas as being an important topic as well. So the third goal focuses on measuring regional materials management and waste reduction efforts. Again, this is an area where North Central Texas COG has been a leader in the state of Texas and really nationally for a long time, and the objectives here are really a continuation of that. I actually led a couple of recycling measurement studies for North Central Texas COG several years ago. So that was some really groundbreaking type efforts that even preceded work that's been done at the state level. And then more recently, through as a part of the Know What to Throw campaign, to evaluate what's happening from a contamination and capture rate perspective, are some of the objectives that have been addressed in the past, and maybe give some perspective on what could occur going forward. And then goal number 4 is to support and encourage innovative technologies for other waste. So I don't think there's a specific objective here, but just to recognize that there may be an opportunity to encourage innovative technologies in the future. And then the 5th goal is to recognize the importance of promoting public and private sector partnerships. In just a few minutes, we'll share with you some of the results of the surveys that really show that there is a great need for collaboration between the public and the private sector for solid waste management and recycling and organics programs to continue to be successful in this region, because there is so much crossover between both the public and private sector collaborating with each other, be it for collection and or processing or disposal facilities. And so purpose of this goal is to really recognize the importance of that aspect. So the next key topic that we want to talk about focuses on demographics and generation. And so if you really want to get into a lot more details on this issue, there's definitely more information, not only in the volume 2, but moreover in the attachment to volume 2, to where we break down this type of data and slice and dice it in a much greater level of detail than what I'll share with you all this afternoon. But essentially what this slide communicates is for residential, commercial, and industrial sectors, what their population or number of employees are, as well as the total number of tons that are disposed and or recycled, which also includes organics diversion as well. And then what TCEQ requires is a projection of that information over the next 20 years, and that's what is communicated here. So a key assumption that's made and for this information is and it's only an assumption, that the quantities of materials that are either disposed or diverted will be maintained at the same percentages of what they are presently. So hopefully we will see, as time goes by, these gray shaded parts that are on the bottom portions of the bar charts, because they represent residential, commercial, and industrial disposal, that those will hopefully decrease relatively in a relatively proportional perspective in the future. And then these blue, green, and red boxes that represent recycling, organics, and C&D materials will hopefully increase into the future. But again, what's communicated here as required by TCEQ just really represents kind of more of a straight line projection based on where we are today. So key information that was provided through the survey is shown on this slide and some of the additional ones based on the survey results. And I think this is very insightful, especially for those of you all that are with various local governments within the region. So if you want to get a sense of the collection frequency for trash, recycling, yard waste, and brush and bulk, it's communicated within the plan. And so there are still, on the left-hand side, relatively an even split between the number of cities that are at twice a week versus weekly trash collection. On the recycling side, weekly collection is definitely the most popular way to provide that service. And then for yard waste, it's also most often when it is provided on a weekly basis. But what I'll point out there is that there's definitely a smaller number of entities that responded to this part of the survey. And what that really means is that there's just a lower number of communities that are providing a separate yard waste collection program. And then the fourth pie chart on the right-hand side communicates that there's definitely a significant number of differences with respect to the frequencies for brush and bulky collection. And I think this is going to continue to be a really important issue for cities in the region as there's challenges with getting equipment as well as staffing these types of operations, understanding what the collection frequencies are, and that there's really a relatively smaller number of those communities that are at, say, a weekly or every other week collection basis, and we're seeing more and more of the communities move toward monthly or less frequent collections or an on-call type of program. So point this out just to be able to show that this can be a meaningful resource, so that if your community is looking at potentially changing the way in which services are provided from a collection frequency perspective, there's really meaningful data within the plan. Some additional data points are to look at who is providing collection services. So we have this slide focused on trash, and the next one communicates for recycling. And we thought it was important to communicate the survey responses a couple of different ways. And so the way to read this slide is that it's organized based on who's the service provider for residential, multifamily, and commercial. And then the blue are the municipal crews. The orange is that a city contracts out with a hauler, and then green is if the individual customer, be it a resident or a business, actually subscribes with the hauler. And again, we've communicated it a couple of different ways. First, just based on the number of cities that responded, but then over here on the right-hand side, as we just looked at, what do those cities represent in terms of their populations? And so essentially what this means is that there's definitely a significant number of cities that contract out for services, but when you look at it over here on the right-hand side from a population perspective, there's actually more residents that are serviced by municipal crews. So essentially that means that some of the bigger cities are much more active in the municipal collection marketplace. So that makes sense. Smaller cities are going to typically be more likely to contract out for services, and a number, but not all of the bigger cities may provide the collection services themselves. So this next slide communicates the same type of information, but for recycling. So I won't go through this one in detail as the results are relatively similar to what I just communicated on the trash collection side of things, but just wanted to give you that perspective on additional information that's included in the plan. Another really important part of our evaluation, and again required by TCEQ, is to evaluate the adequacy of facilities within the region. And so we're going to communicate this for across 3 different slides. So we're going to start with landfills and HHW, and then the next slide will address transfer stations, and then the third slide on this topic addresses a number of opportunities to reduce waste through material recovery facilities and organics processing. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that when TCEQ is asking the question of, are the facilities that are in place adequate for the region across all of those different facility types, our opinion on that is that the answer is no. And this is an opinion that we did talk in depth with the subcommittee about on this, and shared what our rationale was for coming to those conclusions. And one of the things that I want to emphasize, and we'll get into this on many of the individual discussion points, is that in almost all cases, this planning region has the most number of the various types of facilities and or the most advanced or technologically capable types of these facilities of anywhere in Texas. But North Central Texas planning region is also very dynamic. It's continuing to grow. Facilities like landfills are going to reach capacity as that happens. Hopefully more diversion efforts are going to happen as well, like recycling and more materials being diverted on the organic side. So those are some of the key reasons why, in our opinion, we do not think that the current set of facilities in the region are going to be adequate for future needs. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't value or think that those facilities are doing great work now, because they certainly are, but just going forward is the reason why we're saying that those facilities are not adequate. So what we can do now is just go through briefly each one of these facility types, starting with landfills. And so the concern here is that disposal facilities are very much concentrated in the Metroplex area of the region, and some of those facilities have a limited number of years of capacity, while others have been able to increase some of their capacity limits, and details of all of that is definitely included in the plan. This issue is definitely exacerbated on the western region of the North Central Texas planning area, and I think that's been well documented in a prior study, as the 8 westernmost counties only have about 16 years of capacity. And then this issue of adequacy is also important to mention that for C&D landfills, there's a need there because their capacity for those facilities is just proportionally lower than their proportion of the waste stream. Then the next category is for household hazardous waste drop-off facilities. So again, the North Central Texas region has one of the most extensive networks of HHW facilities in Texas. We listed just a few of those, but again, it's such a large region that there are going to be areas that are still in need of these services, and as the region continues to grow, the need for those types of facilities is only going to continue to increase. Speaking of growth and the need for additional facilities, I think this is where transfer stations have played a very important role in the management of solid waste within the region, but in the future will likely have an even greater role to play. And so as the region continues growing and more material is generated, it's likely that landfill capacity is just going to be located further away from where the waste is generated. And so that's going to increase the amount of material that transfer stations are going to need to receive. And so there's just going to be an ongoing need to assess disposal and transportation, especially in the western region of the region, similar to what we were saying on the landfill side, but also for other transfer stations in the region. This is also something where a number of the transfer stations have been around for a long time, and so some of those facilities may need to be improved or even rebuilt in the future. And as all this occurs, we also think that it's important to recognize that while historically transfer stations have focused on moving trash predominantly, but there may be a need in the future, especially as more diversion occurs, for additional capabilities for material handling, for recycling and organics at transfer stations. So this next slide talks about important facilities, starting with material recovery facilities or recycling facilities. Again, North Central Texas has more MRFs than any other region in the state, and it has some of the most advanced MRFs in the region. But a number of these facilities are operating at capacity, so increases in either the residential capture rate, or we're also seeing more cities doing more on the commercial recycling efforts, that there's a potential for existing capacity to be exceeded. From a C&D recycling perspective, the region only has one commercial C&D recycling facility, and there's so much either construction, renovation, and demolition activities happening that there definitely could be a benefit for more recycling efforts going forward. And composting, I know, is a very important topic for the region, where again, there are a number of composting facilities in the region, but with there being so much organic material, especially food waste, going to landfill, that increasing this portion of the waste stream to go to composting creates an opportunity for current capacity to be exceeded, both from a residential and commercial perspective. And then the last category is for citizen collection stations. So again, there's a population of the region that's continuing to grow at a high rate, especially out in some of the more rural areas of the planning region. And so there may be a need for additional collection stations in the future. So as we start to wrap up the presentation, there's a couple more topics that we're going to communicate with you all based on results from the survey of the municipalities. So this slide focuses on who the municipalities are partnering with. And so specifically, this slide communicates the number of times that were cited by municipalities in terms of who they partner with. And so earlier, when I talked about one of the goals reflecting the importance of collaboration between the public and private sector, I think this slide here really validates that information. As the local government said, there's extensive partnering with facilities, be those on the public or private sector, as well as with haulers, which is going to, for the most part, be private sector type companies. But then there's also a recognition that there's a need for partnering with other cities, because sometimes it's so easy to go across the border or the city lines from one city to the next, and so many people move from one city to another within the region, that there's definitely an importance of the recognizing the need to partner amongst municipalities. And then there's a number of other important partners that were identified, water districts like North Texas Municipal Water District. Of course, the Council of Governments has a very important role in partnering, as well as various state departments, Keep Texas Beautiful, school districts, even us as your consultant, even has identified at least once by somebody as part of the survey. So then the next part of the information from the survey results focused on the most cited recycling barriers. Again, similar to the prior slide, just the number of times that these barriers were identified in the survey. So I won't go through each and every one of these, but to just highlight the top 3 responses as far as most cited recycling barriers. And I think these will resonate very well with this group. First is processing costs, as I think you all have an appreciation of from the Know What to Throw campaign, where that very much focused on contamination. That was cited as an important barrier, as well as the lack of funding. We also asked kind of the inverse of that question as far as, well, what are the most cited recycling benefits? And so where I talked earlier about the importance of market development, that was cited as tied with extending landfill life as the 2 most important recycling benefits, followed by, and this has been a long important topic for the planning region, is the need to minimize illegal dumping. And then when we asked the question about the most cited waste reduction barriers, the top 3 were to phase out single-use items. So that's definitely something that we see very, very often in the industry, as well as that was tied with lack of staff, and then followed closely by lack of funding. So then we also asked about what were some of the most cited waste reduction benefits. And the top 3 there were investment in package reduction, market development for reusable products, followed by the importance of reducing consumption. So that covers the topics that we wanted to share with you all today as far as the questions and comments. But just real quickly though, before we, in case anybody does need to go, I can just very quickly go through what the next steps will be after or through tomorrow and thereafter. So like we said earlier, we will be asking for comments through tomorrow from both the RCC as well as from the public, and then working to get an approved draft during the month of July, and then going to the executive board in August. We haven't talked about this item here, which is a storyboard, but one of our thoughts that we had shared with Cassidy and Hannah, as well as with the subcommittee, was for Burns and Mac to do some additional work to take what is in the volume 1 and volume 2 information and to communicate that in kind of a storyboard type format, so that it's a little bit easier to digest. So it won't be every single portion of what's included in volume 1 and volume 2, but some of the more salient information to communicate that on a web-based platform in kind of a storyboard type of format. And then the expectation is to submit the final plan to the TCEQ by the end of August. So with that, I'll just back up a couple slides to open it up. Hannah, if that sounds good to you, to any questions that participants may have.
Absolutely. We can definitely open it up now.
And just to clarify, because I was so focused on the presentation side, doesn't look like we've had any comments offered yet via the chat box, right?
That is correct. I have not seen anything in the chat box.
Okay.
And no one is raising their hand quite yet, but we will hang out here for a few moments and see what we get back.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, Kathy, go ahead.
Scott, first, fantastic job. in putting this together. I'm sure if Jonathan did most of this, probably like writing a master's thesis. Very.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Thank Jonathan. He did the lion's share of the work on this. So, but we certainly appreciate that. And Ms. Clark also was a key contributor as well. So thank you very much for those kind words, Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, the format's so difficult to work with, and I know I helped out, about 5 years ago on that update, and it really is difficult to do. So great job. One thing I did want to ask, and this is, way down in the document, where I think you're talking about just examples. The one I'm looking at in particular is on resource recovery, and you specifically pull out some cities, just the last, grant that we did. And I'm trying to think if that's a good idea to include some of those in there, just because it's so dated. Then once it gets published, as we continue to move on, I mean,
right.
How long? I guess my question is, how long until we have to update this again? I guess is my question.
Yeah. So let me. And Hannah, I don't know if you and Cassidy have some perspective on what the update frequency may be in the future. So if you don't mind responding to that first, and then Jonathan, you and I can share why we communicated that information the way that we did in the plan. But Hannah, you get to go ahead, please.
Okay, let me unmute myself and I can definitely do that. So Kathy, that's a really great question. I would say that per TCQ, we are not technically obligated to redo this plan or update it in any way, shape, or form for another 20 years. That's not to say that the Regional Management Plan Subcommittee may come back in a few years and decide that they want to update parts of it, but we still will have to follow TCQ's template. This is what they want us to utilize going forward, which is why the group decided they wanted just to go ahead and update it now and not stick with that Volume 2 plan that was updated in 2015, which, I would say is a little bit more free form as what the new Volume 2 is. But we could update it at any point. We're open to do that. It would just be under the direction of the subcommittee and the RCC.
Hey, thanks very much, Hannah.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan, do you mind chiming in as far as why we included some of those prior grant recipients as example?
Yeah, exactly. So we just wanted to provide some examples. There's actually a report on North Central Texas COG's website that provided some recent examples of some cities that received grant funding, and we just wanted to provide those as just a couple examples of just current ways in which grant funding is used by municipalities in the region.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And Kathy, to your point, and this would just be up to the COG staff and RCC or subcommittee in the future, but it would be very easy if you would want to just provide some type of a update on a periodic basis of what some of those grants might be. So again, I don't know if you'd want to do that, but you would have that flexibility to do that if that's something that you would want to do. Yeah, and also Kathy, I appreciate what you're saying in terms of the format of this. I mean, there was a lot of Jonathan and I just kind of like looking at each other of like, oh man, you really have to do it this way, and that's really, yeah, you do. So we definitely recognize that the format of this, I mean, it has a very important reason why they're done the way that they are, but it's not the easiest format to work within.
So good answer to my question. My other question was, and I'm not sure exactly what, I know it's at the very first part of the document, you referenced the comprehensive economic development strategy. Was that something that's COG has done recently, and you pulled information from that? How did that tie in with this?
Hey, Kathy, good question. So that is a very recent document. I believe it was published last year, and it's kind of like the planning period 21 through 26. And that is in response to the demographics and material generation discussion that's required in volume 2 related to the commercial and industrial sectors. So we were tasked with, to complete the TCQ's form, we needed to provide some discussion regarding economic activity in the region. So we use that plan as kind of a basis for that information.
Great explanation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else have any questions or comments they'd like to share? Okay, well, I'm gonna.
Let me ask the group what we summarized as far as the adequacy of the facilities. Does that resonate well with everybody? Does anybody have any difference of perspective there?
Scott, I'll answer that. I was just going to say I'm going to go back over that, this afternoon, because that really got my attention. But overall, from what I see on paper, I like what you have.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, were you going to mention something?
Well, I was going to concur, but also, I think you made a very profound statement in that, what we have is while it's adequate, it's probably the most that's in the state. And I know here in Denton, we seem to be the regional supplier. Our recycling, our citizen collection recycling stations, we probably 20 to 30% is participation by city Denton residents. Everything else is coming in from the rest of the county or outside the area. So I think, there's what we know about is being served, but there's also that unserved component that, we may not be able to put quite our finger on yet. So, I think that while they're adequate, there's significant room for improvement.
Yeah, well stated. So appreciate that perspective as well as what you mentioned, Kathy. And Julie, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, we're kind of in a rural fringe area, and I think I agree with all the points, but I'd like to see more detail if possible, where you have those inadequacies. If you could identify more specifically areas of greatest need, like the city of Denton said, they're serving a lot of people outside of their community. Well, we're serving a lot of people on the solid waste end here within the county, but we don't have much participation. And then the C&D is just overwhelming our transfer station. So, if we can figure out, pinpoint more areas where we're seeing the greatest impact, where we have the greatest need, would be, if you can get more detail in rather than as a regional just blanket statement for the whole region, I'd like to see that.
Sure. And Julie, which organization are you with?
I'm with the city of Cleburne in Johnson County.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so we, the presentation today was very much at a high level. The plan itself does go into some additional detail, but it may not be probably the additional level of detail that you would like to see. And the reason for that is just there was some limitations in terms of the level of detail that was either understood or could be provided within the plan. And we were just sensitive to, if we would say like exactly what you mentioned specific to Cleburne, there might be another area that has the exact same issue, but if we're not aware of it and would not communicate that, that could create some additional concerns. So what we try to do is to strike a good balance with regard to that. Another request that I would have for the group is we didn't show them today, but Jonathan will attest to this. We put a lot of effort into updating the various facility maps. And so Jonathan, do you mind, can you bring just one of those up real quick and share your screen?
Yeah, I will do that. 1 second.
So if we missed a facility that you don't see on one of those maps, by all means, please let us know. For the landfills, those are more straightforward since they are, of course, regulated by TCQ. On the MERS, we think we have a really good understanding of where those are located, but other facilities that are not quite as regulated, which can include composting facilities as well as citizen collection stations. If there's any of those types of facilities that are not shown on these maps, that's something that we would definitely appreciate any information on. Well, Jonathan is bringing that up as an example. Does anybody have any other questions or comments in the meantime?
This is Julie Winchell again. I was wondering, since you said that you had areas where you had less information, would there be entities or people that some of us might contact to help encourage them to provide more information, or is that too late?
Yeah, it's a great idea, but unfortunately it's too late for that since we do have to get everything finalized in the next few weeks. Yeah, appreciate the question though. How you doing, Jonathan? And all right.
Good. I'm just having a little bit of a glitch here in loading the actual list.
Okay.
But it does exist in the appendix of the plan there's a table within this map that provides just a listing of all these numbers that you see within the map. So it's just not loading on my screen at the moment, but that does exist in the draft document available on the COG site.
Yeah. All right. No, thank you. And then, yeah, so these are organized based on the symbology and the colors as far as the different facility types. And so this one that you had here is just an example, right, Jonathan, of the diversion type facilities. So this one does not include either the landfills or the transfer stations, just because there was too much information to try to communicate on one slide. But all of this is included in the draft plan. So if there's anything that we missed, just please let us know.
Thanks, Scott. Well, I'm not seeing anyone else raise their hand or put anything in the chat, but I am going to take over sharing, Jonathan, real quick and just kind of repeat a little bit of what Scott had shared a moment ago, just as a quick reminder. So we do have some next steps for approval of the regional plan. So as mentioned, obviously today is our public meeting and the comment period closes tomorrow, Friday, July 1st. You can provide those to me via my email at hallen@nctcog.org. And then after we incorporate any feedback received, Burns and McDonald will provide a new draft to COG, which will then be distributed to the Resource Conservation Council via email for review and approval. We will be taking an electronic vote for that. So any RCC members on the line, be on the lookout for that email, likely sometime around July 18th. And then RCC members will have the deadline of July 29th to provide their vote. And then after which, assuming approval is received by the RCC, COG will move forward with receiving NCT COG Executive Board approval for the regional plan at their meeting scheduled for August 25th. So the reason that there's about a month gap in between that July 29th deadline and the August 25th Executive Board meeting is just because COG needs enough time to do all of our internal documentation processes to make sure that it actually gets on the executive board agenda. And then again, assuming that approval is received from COG's executive board, we will submit the regional plan to TCQ for their review and final approval of the document. And I will pause here again. I'll put my contact information up on this slide as well. And Kathy, your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you go back to that slide for me?
Yes.
So Cassidy and I actually talked about the electronic vote for the RCC.
Mm-hmm.
So my question would be, we talked about, making a presentation at the RCC, but I don't think that's necessary. But my question is, do you think there might be any pushback from RCC members who feel like, well, wait a minute, we didn't get a presentation, we didn't get to discuss this at the RCC meeting? Do y'all anticipate that at all?
I would say no, just based off of the minor feedback that we've received so far. I would anticipate that there would hopefully not be any pushback on it. If we do receive any pushback, we'll definitely, talk about it internally and figure out what our next steps need to be for that. But I am really hoping that we won't receive any pushback on that. And like Burns and McDonald mentioned a little bit ago, they will be coming to the August 18th RCC meeting. They will be giving a presentation over, a little bit of what was discussed today, but also with a focus on that kind of extra deliverable of the story map storyboard that Scott and Jonathan mentioned as well.
Yeah, which I think it's a fantastic idea. I'm all for that. And then my last question would be, Hannah, so for this to go to the RTC for approval, I assume in the email, it would be Cecile making a motion that since it's coming from committee to approve?
Yeah, that's a great question. So since it's an electronic vote, I think that it does work a little bit differently, but that information will be included in that RCC email that goes out with the details on what we're asking for and what you are specifically voting on as well. So all the details will be in that email.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, just Kathy, you brought up some really good points. And Hannah, if a member of the RCC would say request a presentation, since today's session is being recorded, that's one resource that you could refer them to, because unless we get something significant in the next 24 hours or so, I don't think there's going to be huge changes relative to what we've communicated today, right?
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we recorded today, just to have that extra resource.
So if you're watching this later, hope all's good.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing anyone else's hand raised. I'm not seeing any other chats or anything. So I'm going to put my last slide up again. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or anything, please feel free to reach out. But if not, at this point, this meeting is now adjourned and I am going to stop recording. Thank you all for joining today.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We appreciate your participation.
Thanks, Scott. Great
Thanks,
job.
Scott. Great job.
Hey, thank you. See you later.